Welcome once again to the Trainwell podcast, inspiring you to move more, get stronger, and have fun. On this episode, we talk with trainer Celina. She has a lifelong passion for all things fitness and nutrition. She holds a BS in exercise physiology from the University of Southern Maine and has worked in a variety of health promotion roles, including cardiopulmonary rehabilitation. That one's a hard one for me. Chiropractic neurology, corporate wellness, and more recently as a personal trainer and nutrition coach. She believes in holistic approaches to fitness. From her experience, all aspects of well-being are interconnected, and she uses this ideology to help her clients achieve not only their fitness goals, but deep health. That had a lot of big words in it, but I think I got through it okay. So on this episode, we learned so much from Celina. Joey was taking notes the entire time. She is a wealth of knowledge about plant-based nutrition and how that affects training, and really balanced approaches that people can take if they want to start exploring being plant-based.
We hope you guys enjoyed the show as much as we did. Ton of nuggets, ton of takeaways. I'll even share with you my notebook if you guys want to. But as always, please subscribe to our channel, guys. Give us a 5-star review. If you want to train with Celina, we'll leave her link in the show description. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode with Celina.
A cherry is like a cool, fun thing that happened to you recently, and a pit is obviously something that's not as great. And you can say either one first. So what's your cherry and pit?
Okay. I have a great cherry, at least in my opinion. I recently was in a really big performance a couple of weeks ago. It was my birthday weekend also. And it was just such an inspiring, beautiful piece of art. And it came together so perfectly. The dress rehearsal was a flop, but the real performance was a total win. And I felt so inspired being a part of something like that.
What kind of performance was it?
So I'm a puppeteer, but I also did acting in this performance. So I was costumed. I was behind the scenes doing hand puppets. There were shadow puppets that I wasn't doing. Shadow work, lights, music, live music. It was just a really full sort of performance.
When you say puppets, you're like hand puppets?
I was doing hand puppeteering. I also was doing live puppeteering where you costume. So a lot of people don't know, but being costumed is puppeteering. So think of Sesame Street and Big Bird and Snuffleupagus. There are people inside those costumes, and that's a form of puppeteering.
That is so cool. I know some people who did puppeteering, and honestly, I think it's so hard. I don't even think I would try it because I'd probably mess it up so bad. So
it's not for everyone. It's kind of a weird niche thing, but it's so fun. And the puppets make everything more fun and funny. So a puppet can do anything and it will get everyone on the floor laughing, whether it's a child or an adult. And it's so special and really therapeutic.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. What's your pit?
My pit. This time of year kind of sucks. I'm ready for spring. I am ready for more natural motivation, more sunlight. But is it really a pit? I think the seasons and how they change is really important for us going within and taking some time to spend on those more inward or relaxing or in the home activities. And then we have the other seasons for the outdoor and outer stuff. So it's a pit, but it's sort of something we get used to, especially here in the Northeast.
Celina, tell people where you're calling from.
Yeah, I'm in Southern Maine. So Scarborough, Maine,
Nice.
right on the beach, lots of beaches. It's so beautiful in the summer, but in the winter, it's pretty rough. We got lots of snow right now, as I think a lot of us do here in the Northeast. Aren't you two in the Northeast as well?
I'm in Colorado, and I always say that the wilderness in Maine by far outdoes the wilderness in Colorado, hands down.
Everyone has a different opinion. Your mountains are better, in my opinion.
I'm in the Northeast, and I'm just I got under desk bike pedals, so that's my keeping me active during the day because I don't want to go out in the cold.
Yeah. So
all right,
hoping
Celina,
that turns around soon.
Let's get rolling. What do you say? Well, I guess we should give the listeners a backdrop. You're vegan, plant-based, correct?
Plant-based, not vegan. I have been vegan though for a chunk of my life. So
I think that's a great starting point is tell people, because for me, I think of plant-based and vegan and vegetarian. Yes, the difference with meat, with animal products for sure, but take us down the road of definition of what each one means.
yeah, so vegetarian and vegan are underneath the umbrella, I would say, of plant-based. Vegan is the extreme, right? That far end of only plant-based products. Some vegans even eliminate like honey or other byproducts of animals or leather. I wasn't that extreme when I was vegan, but then vegetarian often includes certain animal products like eggs or dairy. Sometimes fish is included. And there's different forms of vegetarianism, but vegan is that sort of far extreme, but it's all within the plant-based world. So the majority of vegetarian or vegans foods are from plants.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So can you talk a little bit about your personal story? Like what made you initially want to become plant-based, or maybe you were always plant-based, and then what drove you to be vegan, and then what drove you away from being a vegan?
Yeah, of course. I sort of started this really young without realizing. I was that little kid eating my veggies, leaving more of the meat or a lot of the meat on the plate and being forced to eat the meat, right? Because back when I grew up, you were required to finish all of your food. But it caused my stomach some upset. I just didn't love the animal stuff. Dairy from a very early age bothered me. I used to report having belly aches after ice cream, but for some reason I was still fed ice cream. So in my early teen years, I started taking more of a stand for like what I wanted to put in my body, stopped using dairy off and on, playing with what worked, what didn't work. And it was probably late teens, early 20s where things really got more severe. And I went full like no dairy, which then turned into vegan. I did gluten-free at the same time as being vegan because I was trying to eliminate all possible irritants for my digestive system. And I felt so much better. It wasn't perfect, it didn't immediately make me better, but it reduced my symptoms so drastically and they were affecting my life. I kept that up for almost 8 years, so the majority of my 20s. And then it stopped being right for me. The volume of food I had to eat to maintain my weight, it bothered my jaw muscles after a while because I was doing raw vegan for part of that. It ended up just not being right eventually. And I think that's a really important point to make with all of this is that this isn't right for everyone. This doesn't have to be something we uphold for the rest of our lives if we choose to try it out. It's something to be informed about. We can even just have plant-based or vegan meals. That can be a really amazing part of a sustainable lifestyle. So it worked for me and then it didn't. And then I phased foods back in slowly to see what I could tolerate without being sick. Started with eggs. That was really hard because eggs sometimes after being vegan, just the way they cook and taste and feel, it was just odd. But then eggs and then a little bit of meat and only more recently a little bit of fish, but I'm not a big seafood person. So right now I have meat a couple times a week, eggs most days, and then lots and lots of like edamame and other plant-based proteins.
Oh man, can we back up? That was awesome. Your symptoms you had that you started kind of feeling that this wasn't sustainable. I feel as though our listeners can relate to that. So what were some of those symptoms you were getting fed up with?
Volume of food, having a busy life. I was in college at this time and having a busy life, not a lot of money, and just having to constantly be eating and buying and preparing food. It wore on me. And at that point in my like metabolism and body, I was just burning through food so much more quickly than now. So it bothered my mouth. It was bothering my GI tract because of sometimes the too much fiber and too many veggies can be bothersome. So that's a really interesting thing that I don't think gets talked about very much with plant-based diets. So it didn't, my training was starting to be affected. It just felt like I didn't have all of the energy that I once had. It felt just not sustainable. And I'm not exactly sure what the one thing was that changed it. I started becoming more in tune with my body and realizing that I needed to make a shift. And because I wasn't doing it for, really strong environmental or like animal reasons, I was doing it for my health. I thought it really made sense to pay attention to what my body was telling me. So that's when I started adding things back in, but it was tough to add things back in. And even still, I forget that I maybe don't have to eat this crazy volume of vegetables because I am supplementing in other ways. So I still have sort of some veganism carryovers.
That's a really interesting point. I really like that you bring that up. So I was a vegan for about 3.5 years, very strict vegan. I was so dogmatic about it at the time. And I think a lot of, I don't want to say a lot of vegans are, I don't know. I was at the time, and I know that there's that perception that vegans are so strict and so, dogmatic about the rules, following the rules. And I remember at one near the end of my journey as a vegan, the amount of fiber I was eating, like you said, was causing me so much intestinal discomfort. It was hard to do things at times, but I didn't really understand that at the time. So I just naturally shifted away from it. It was a hard decision, but I think the point I want to make, and I would love for you to speak to, are the ways that people can be plant-based, still listen to their bodies, or maybe they do strongly care about the environment or animal issues, how they can still incorporate being plant-based without necessarily having to go full vegan.
Yeah. Luckily nowadays it's becoming a bit more trendy to get your food locally, whether it's animal products or plant products. There's more of the alternatives on the market, and that's, processed food. So that's a whole nother story, but there are so many options where we don't have to just be eating like roughage or straight up beans from a can or cooked on the stovetop. So there's ways to stay plant-based and add in little bits here and there. And I would suggest that, like dairy products or eggs are a really great way to bridge that gap if you're not quite comfortable with animal flesh, or if there's those sort of like ethical or environmental concerns. It's different for everybody, and it might be different day to day, week to week, month to month. But I think just having that awareness that maybe you can try to contact local farmers or other such places, food co-ops that have a little bit more of a direct connection to the animal products. Therefore, they're likely treated a little bit better.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what were you saying about like plant-based meals? Like it's like maybe it's not your whole day, but you are saying, does that mean like, oh, for lunch, I'm not going to eat animal products, something like that?
Yeah. It could be a meal, it could be a snack, it could be a once a week sort of thing. My breakfast is always plant-based. I don't eat any animal products for breakfast and haven't for many years, even outside of being vegan. A dairy-free yogurt, some nuts, some seeds, some fruit, absolutely delicious, super filling. And I like to be choosy about my meat, and that's something I've always carried forward. But people trying to adopt these maybe vegan or plant-based meals, it's really not that difficult. And some things we'll likely talk about later will be good information to carry forward. Things like edamame and the other high protein legumes, certain grains. So there's ways you can put a meal together with really high protein choices, especially if you're an athlete. And walk away from it getting your fiber, right? And maybe not needing to carry it over into the next meal. And a lot of us have these things likely already in our pantries, or it wouldn't be that more expensive to add these to our grocery list when we are at the store.
Celina, I want to get to protein later, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's extremely important to start going down this path of letting the listener know how crooked the food industry is and how misled that the typical SAD, standard American diet, can have on the body. And what people think, like when you go to the grocery store, like if you go to even the produce in the meat section, the seafood section, you're not getting the highest quality anything. And so talk to us about how can somebody discern between what I'm eating, whether it's a blueberry or a piece of salmon. Let's put it in the perception of a client who wants to lose weight, wants to get healthier, build muscle. They speak with their trainer, okay, or a registered dietitian, hey, you got to start eating healthier, blah, blah, blah. They're in the grocery store, go.
Okay. I like to think of food on a continuum. We have our whole base, straight from nature products. And then there's a continuum that leads us to the ultra processed in a package or multiple packages. We can't really tell where it came from the earth or from an animal. And thinking about food on that continuum will really guide you. It's great to eat lots of whole foods, but that's not realistic in some moments. So, trying to find things in that middle of the continuum or bending towards the whole side of things is a great way to make choices at the grocery store. What does it mean when I say whole foods? That produce section where there's apples, bananas, fruits, and vegetables in their whole state or mostly whole state. Those are the things that come top of mind when we talk about whole foods, but whole foods also are, animal products that are minimally processed, maybe just a little bit to make it safe for us humans to eat or to package and be able to be in a store. Things that are just a few degrees maybe away from nature. Those are some really great food choices to make and very accessible in the grocery stores here in the United States. Back in the day, the grocery stores used to be told to navigate like going around the perimeter. Not all grocery stores are set up like that, but that can be still a really good general rule. Produce section, maybe start there, fill up your cart, and then the dairy tends to be kind of along that back wall or somewhere along the perimeter, and then it leads us to sort of the registers. But those things in the middle tend to be a little more packaged, right? Because they're sitting on a shelf and they might be pretty far removed from that continuum of the whole foods versus the ultra processed foods. But ultra processed foods have their place, right? Sometimes we're traveling and we need a quick something. So a protein bar or whatever sort of thing does fall into our lap. But trying to make the best choices you can given the environment you're in is a really good mainstay. And when you're in a grocery store, like we are in the United States and have lots of things accessible to us, maybe you do make some choices a little closer to foods in their whole state.
Whiskey's a natural food, correct?
Yeah, sure.
I was just going to say, it sounds like you take a very balanced approach, which I really appreciate, because that is a good point. I mean, and I think it's true. There are different moments, life situations that arise, and we can't always make the absolute best decision. And you just kind of make the best decision you can in the moment. I'm curious what your thoughts are, given that we were just talking about like whole foods versus those processed foods. There are so many more vegan options now, like the Beyond, I don't know if we could say brands. Well, the vegan meats that you see in all the grocery stores. When I was a vegan, I mean, it was like tofu, and it was the one that starts with an S.
Seitan?
Yes, seitan, yeah, or tempeh or whatever. Those were kind of like the only vegan meat options at the time, and now you're seeing them everywhere. How should people think about these foods? Because like on one hand, it's plant-based. Okay, that's healthy, quote unquote. On the other hand, it's highly processed. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a really good thing to think about. And it's going to be individual. Some people that need to stay dogmatic with veganism might find a big relief in these products, albeit ultra processed products, right? And we don't really know all of the energy that goes into the creation and production and manufacturing of these products yet. That information is still kept private, unfortunately. I've a few times in the last handful of years tried to find out, because I think that's very interesting. The meat industry, of course, produces a lot of awful toxins for our environment. So it could be a slightly better choice if we're looking just at like an energetic standpoint and, greenhouse gases perspective. But I might be controversial in saying this, but I'm not the biggest fan of those products. They weren't available to me either when I was vegan. It was mostly tofu, tempeh. I didn't do seitan because that's gluten containing and I was gluten-free at the time. I think they have their place. Like a protein bar when we're traveling has its place, or a protein bar when we're stuck in the car for many hours, right? Like there's a place for these things. And I actually do eat these products sometimes, but I don't have them in for most of my protein sources. I try to get most of my protein sources closer to that whole side of things when I can. But I have to use a protein powder. You know, protein is hard to get in, and it's something that you have to weigh those options. What are your ethics? What's available to you? What can you afford? And I think there are options like tempeh and tofu that are a little less processed than some of these other can't believe them meats or whatever we want to call them without using a brand name. But I think it just depends on the individual. All of this has such a big individual basis that I leave it up to all of you listening to decide. But there are trade-offs, right? Ultra processed protein that tastes like meat, and then that meat option, maybe a local meat option. What is best? That choice, I think, is left best up to the individual.
When I love individual. When you started adding stuff back in after being vegan for a while, what did you notice agreed with you and disagreed with you?
It took me many years to fully introduce meat, like many, many, many years.
Oh, wow.
And I never liked preparing meat even before being vegan. I was always wigged out about this is an animal's muscle. Why isn't it bloody? Shouldn't it be bloody? Or eggs, like that weird wiggle if they're not cooked right. So, you know, eggs, which was my first thing to introduce, was really tough for me. Maybe took me about a year to fully integrate them. Every once in a while, even now, though, I'll make an egg and I'm like, nope, I'm having something else. So the meat was hardest though, and that took many years to fully incorporate and to have a better routine about, and to find the choices that didn't bother me. For many years to this date, ground beef does not agree with me. But ground turkey of certain brands does. And so I've found the things that sort of work for me. But it was really tough, and it took a lot of energy and tenacity to figure that out. But my health was of concern. So I've always been able to put my health first for whatever reason. It was tough though.
Yeah, that sounds really hard. I know I cannot relate to having like certain health issues or stomach issues, but I know a lot of people who do struggle with that. And I really feel for them because it is very challenging, to figure out what is it that's causing these issues, and then going through the process of eliminating and bringing back. And it's very like kind of all consuming at times. So I will ask though, because you talked about like different sorts of protein sources, and I think this could be a good time to kind of segue into that. Whether you're like fully strict vegan or some form of vegetarian, protein always comes up as a concern about getting enough protein. So I was just hoping you could break down, like, what are some options if someone really is wanting to be vegan or vegetarian? What are the options that they have available to them? And then additionally, do people who are athletes or like very active need to think about protein differently than someone who maybe isn't quite so active?
Yeah, I'll sort of start backwards. I think we all need to think about protein, especially as we age. Our bodies absorb protein differently as we age, so it becomes of even more importance. And then when we're exercising, and especially strength training on top of that, or required to do long, intense activity, whether it's job related or an athletic endeavor, it's just even more important. And in the vegetarian and vegan space, edamame, soy products tend to be top of the list. And it's something that I had to do a lot of research on to figure out if I thought that that was safe for me, because back, this was 15 years ago when I started this journey, the evidence was really confusing and all over the place. Maybe it still is now. Really, the evidence is sort of out on whether it's unsafe for us to consume these products. Balance is everything. Maybe we don't only eat soy products, right? That probably isn't good for many reasons. But edamame is top of the list, and edamame is going to be a less processed soy product. Anytime we process products, we concentrate them. So if they have maybe some harmful chemicals, there's even more when we've concentrated and processed them. So another reason to shift closer to whole foods. So Edamame is top of the list for me. I personally can't tolerate the whole bean, but I can do a dry roasted edamame. Very strange nuance for me, but I have that like multiple times throughout my day. There are other legumes too that are high in protein, lentils, fava beans, various other beans. Peanuts are a top protein containing legume, and I actually include those quite a bit, more so than other nuts in my diet personally. Other nuts and seeds are high on the list too, though. Walnuts, almonds, pistachios, chia seed, pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds, all really great choices, have a bunch of other good nutrients as well. Some grains are pretty high in protein as well. If you're gluten-free like me, teff, amaranth, quinoa are top of the list. And if you're gluten eating, whole wheat choices are actually really great, especially like spelt, which is like I think it's more like ancient wheat derivative, but it's high in protein. So even some fruits and vegetables are high in protein. I think it's guava, jackfruit. Those are top of the list. Avocado actually are technically a fruit and they're high in protein. For vegetables, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, broccoli, those sort of things, those cruciferous veggies. And then we can add in things like the protein powders. If you're straight up vegan, you want to get plant-based. I use a really great plant-based one that I send to all of my clients, whether they're vegan or meat eating, because it just tastes really good. And some protein powders are a little wonky in my opinion. We can also add in things like nutritional yeast, which has the B vitamins, which is really important for vegans, especially vitamin B12, because typically we can only get that from animal sources. Spirulina is a sea algae, and that's really high in protein and a bunch of other micronutrients as well. So there's actually so many foods that have high protein, and it can lend to a really amazing variety of fruits and vegetables that we're consuming if we're either plant-based or straight up vegan on that sort of extreme end.
You are like Mrs. Plant-Based Pro, Celina. This is awesome. I'm taking notes.
Yeah. You're taking notes. That's awesome. I'm happy to hear that.
I have to ask you I want to go back to the protein powder. Do you recommend a pea protein, a pumpkin protein, and what brands?
So I use Plant Fusion, which has pea, pumpkin, a bunch of other no soy. I didn't on purpose choose it for no soy, but it just happened to be a soy free. So that's awesome if someone wants to avoid or not take in processed soy products. So it's Plant Fusion. I love the vanilla flavor. The chocolate's also okay, a little chalkier. But the taste is really good. And I think that's so important. I don't want to struggle through a protein powder. I really don't, or I don't want to have to doctor it with almond milk and bananas and all of these things. Sometimes I just want to be able to use it with water, get it down, and get on with my day. That's my only protein powder. I've been using it for like almost 20 years now, actually. So I really feel strongly about it. I haven't tried many others. When I have, though, I've just still been partial to Plant Fusion. Okay. Was there another question wrapped up in there? I'm sorry.
I got so many questions for you. Can I ask you about, because I don't get enough vegetables. I'm going to be selfish here for a minute, if Darian can believe that. So I know for sure I don't get enough vegetables. And so I've taken athletic greens for almost 10 years now. Do you feel, because there's a whole thing on gut health. Like my wife went on this, she's a pharmacist, so she sees all these different things. She went like functional medicine she got some certification. Anyways, I was learning a lot about how powerful the plant is, right? And then all the documentaries, Focus Over Knives, Game Changers, all that. So anyways, I was learning like gut health, right? That's become a really hot topic. But what if you're in a pinch? Like, is that okay? Is it appropriate to take this green superfood blend, or is it just go down the toilet?
I certainly hope it is, because I take one every morning.
Yeah, me too.
I agree. I think that if that is the most accessible way for one to get in those foods, it's fine. Of course, it's still important to eat whole foods for the fiber. Some of the other, but the water content even, really important things in the whole food. But if that's not accessible to us, or if we don't like those foods, so we're not going to be eating them much, it's really important to have options. So I think they're called supplements for a reason. They should supplement a balanced and varied diet. I don't think they necessarily should replace but there are certain people that either have to liquid eat only, right? Certain diseases or post surgeries, sometimes people can only have liquid diets. So that's really important. And we can sometimes add it to a protein powder and make it a more convenience type food, which it's really important to have like good convenience choices in this day and age when we're all just so dang busy. So I think they have their place. And I've never used any of those things before, so I don't have a preference or much else of an opinion, but I think they have a place.
Yeah, I really like your point. I mean, I think probably Joey agrees too. Especially in the fitness industry, we tend to think about supplements as just that, like a supplement to ideally a more balanced, well-rounded diet.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I am curious because I remember being a vegan and there were certain supplements that are really recommended if you're not eating animal products. Can you just list out what, if someone is a vegan or even vegetarian, really what should they be thinking about taking regularly as a supplement?
Yeah, B12 is top of the list. It's mainly found in like dairy and straight up animal flesh. However, nutritional yeast, something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, I don't know if y'all caught that, but that naturally contains vitamin B12. So that's a wonderful way to eat a food, get some protein while being vegan, and get that nutrient that's really tough to take in.
Does it have to be does it have to be active yeast, or does it have to be like there's two kinds of yeast, right? There's like a non-active and like a fast acting. It can be any.
Yeah, so I actually don't know exactly how to answer that, but I think the live active stuff is for like bread making, and this other stuff like nutritional yeast, what I use, I don't think it's actually live, but don't quote me on that. That's a really good question. If you look it up, let me know. But I just know that it contains the vitamin B12, which is so super important. So B12 is top of the list. Vitamin D is a close second. We can get it through some fortified mushrooms. If mushrooms after being picked are left out in the sun, they can actually take on some vitamin D. And then when we eat those, we can take them in. But vitamin D is really important, especially for those of us in like the Northern Hemisphere during the winter time. So I supplement that in the winter. Iron is also one of the things that can be tough because heme iron that's found in animal products is more bioavailable, meaning it absorbs better into our bodies. So getting iron from plant sources isn't always as bioavailable, doesn't absorb as well, can sometimes pass through, especially if we're taking in a lot of fiber as well, because fiber clears things out, sometimes even the good things. So iron can be helpful, but you don't have to just supplement. You can use cast iron or, choose some iron containing foods, eat them with vitamin C, and that pairing helps them be more bioavailable. Calcium is sometimes of concern. I feel like that might be a little controversial, but a lot of like alternative milk products now are fortified with both calcium and vitamin D. So most of us nowadays don't have to worry about that. If we weren't eating any of those processed products, we might need to be a little more concerned or choosy about choosing calcium dense plant-based foods, which there still are quite a few. And then iodine is another one that's on the list. Iodine can be found in like cranberries and some other plant sources, but it's in higher concentrations in animal products. We also have iodized salt, though, in the United States, which allows us to get in some iodine, but iodized salt is in the processed foods. So for limiting processed foods, also vegan, maybe even a raw vegan blend, it might be tough to get iodine in, and you might not be able to get enough through like just cranberries alone. So there are some really great supplements or trace mineral supplements that can get you the iodine you need.
That is, you're a dictionary for this stuff. This is crazy. I will just quickly jump in with some hot facts about nutritional yeast.
Mm-hmm.
You're totally right. So a yeast like you're thinking of, Joey, is like an active yeast for typically bread making. A nutritional yeast is a deactivated yeast that's used pretty much strictly for like flavor and nutritional value. So it has a lot of nutritional value, like Celina was saying. But if you haven't had it before, I used to eat it when I was a vegan. It has like a cheesy taste, and you can kind of use it how you would use like Parmesan, where you like sprinkle it on top of a meal, and it has that kind of cheesy garlicky taste, which is really nice.
Yeah, it almost has that umami that is talked about in like the culinary fancy world. I think it really lends well that cheesy flavor that we miss as vegans, or that we missed as vegans years ago. Nowadays, there's lots of really great cheese alternative products that give or actually really act like cheese. It's pretty amazing what they've been able to do. But if you're trying to stay away from those ultra processed foods, the nutritional yeast is a really great one, not only for the taste, but the nutrient profile as well. High protein too.
Okay, so you said to your dictionary, I have to ask this because if you can only pick 5 foods, this may be like picking who your favorite kid is, but give us like your top 5 vegan superfoods that you could think of.
I don't know if these necessarily are superfoods, but and this is in no particular order, because if I had to like grade them in order, I would get mixed up. But for me, top of the list are like herbs and spices. I'm a big tea drinker, maybe a fledgling herbalist. I don't know. Maybe in the future I'll be a real one. But I think herbs and spices have such an amazing space in our world, and they're easy accessible right now where we all live. Nettles, top of the list for me. I drink those daily. They're great for recovery, for joint health. It's actually a Native American remedy. It's wonderful. Ginger, turmeric, marshmallow root, licorice root, echinacea. What else? There's so many others, I'm sure. Cinnamon, dandelion. Really amazing micronutrients and like phytochemical plant components that are just so beneficial. And then it's going to add like an ethnic flair to maybe some of our foods. And it's a way that we can make these veggie-based meals a little bit more satisfying, or if we have cultural significance, or we want to have cultural significance in how we eat, we can include these herbs and spices to really make something pop and to not be ignoring, say, maybe a cultural background that's important. What else is on this list? Do I have to go get 5?
Yeah, you have to get. Yeah.
Okay. I'll do my best. I think high water containing foods like cucumbers, watermelon, celery, those are amazing additions. They add a lot of like bulk, not only because of fiber, because of the water content. So they can really make a meal more filling. And that hydration is really good for our bodies. It's really important to eat some of our eat some of our water instead of just drinking it. Really satisfying, lots of nutrients, and really good for our gut to take in those sort of, I think they're also called like anti-bloat foods, those high water containing foods. Naturally sodium containing too, like celery. I don't know if any of you had celery juice, but it has this like little saltiness to it, which is kind of satisfying if we're being strict vegans and maybe not having a lot of processed foods. Next up, green leafies. Those probably should be closer to the top of the list because green leafies are just such an amazing food group. So, kale, collards, dandelion greens, mustard greens, chard. What else? There's broccolini, broccoli rabe, those sort of things. So many choices nowadays, and fiber is high. Calcium tends to be higher in those dark green leafies, so that's important for getting that calcium in. If you pair it with a vitamin C containing food, that's going to increase that iron absorption. So like citrus fruits. Citrus fruits are also on the list. Citrus fruits, I'll probably just pair that with like fruit in general. Citrus and berries are my favorite choices for fiber and the vitamin C. And I haven't touched on nuts and seeds, which nuts and seeds definitely need their place on this vegan list. So walnuts, almonds, pistachios, chia seeds, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, great protein choices, omega-3 fatty acids, really, really some great stuff. I probably could keep going on, but I'm stopping at 5.
Okay. Yeah. Can I read that back to you real quick?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Herbs and spices, number 1. Mm-hmm. Number 2, high water content foods.
Yeah, like watermelon, celery, cucumber.
Karpuzhi. That's how you say watermelon in Greek. Green leafies. I feel like you're my mom when you say these. Joey, get your green leafies. By the way, when I was 6, she always told me to get an echinacea. It's like, Mom, okay, I get it.
Oh, I love your mom. That's amazing.
Okay, number 4, citrus fruits. Pretty much all fruits and berries. And
it's kind of like fruits, with citrus and berries top, in my opinion, of list.
And then nuts and seeds.
Yeah, it could even be like legumes, nuts, and seeds because peanuts are probably one of the more commonly eaten legumes, but they eat like a nut, right? So I feel like those can all be sort of paired together and they have similar nutrient profiles.
Now, I have an important question.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed you haven't mentioned at all rice or potatoes. And those are like a bulkier food. They're very cheap. So if someone's a vegan and they're looking for like a little bit more bulk, because, like you said, it can be hard to at times to feel really full as a vegan. I know that was a struggle of mine. But I noticed you haven't mentioned those because those are also very accessible, affordable foods. So how do those play a role in this?
Yeah, I think they actually play a really big role. And it's too bad that I actually haven't mentioned them because I'm not leaving them out really on purpose. Rice is amazing. It can turn a dish into like truly a hearty meal. And there's like a comfort component to rice. I am a sweet potato fan. I eat sweet potato almost every day, probably. And as someone who's gluten-free, it's really important for me to have those starchy carbohydrates in my belly. Like I have, nausea and other sort of stomach issues. And so they can be really soothing. Pumpkin as well is grouped in there with those soothing sort of starchy carbohydrates for us gluten-free people. They definitely have their place. I think that those sort of foods should, have a spot on our, say, balanced plate. The starchy carbohydrates like the potato or sweet potato, the rice, the noodle sort of things if you're eating gluten. What are some other corn, peas? Those are sort of those starchy foods that have a place. And then we should definitely have a really big space for the fiber foods. The foods that I was mentioning earlier, like the cucumber, watermelon, the green leafies, basically any other vegetable outside of those starchy ones I mentioned. And then a nice big old section for protein. And for vegans, that's going to likely contain some sort of legume. Hopefully edamame if you're comfortable with soy. But then there's also those gently processed like tempeh, tofu, seitan if you're gluten eating type of foods. So does that answer your question about like where that falls in? It really has a place, and I'm actually disappointed I didn't mention it, but he gave me 5. So to my defense, I did my best.
That was great. I do want to ask because I think in our culture right now, it's very hot and trendy to hate on carbohydrates. You're keto all the time. And if you're plant-based, you're basically carb-based because you're not really going to find a protein as a plant-based person. You're not going to find a protein that's not also a carb. So how are we thinking as in the plant-based space about carbohydrates?
I mean, I think the demonization of macronutrients or any food like nutrient, I think is really frustrating. It's not carbohydrates. It's not fat. It's not it's our overconsumption. It's refined versions of these foods or, easy to overeat versions of these foods that become concerning. When we're eating foods closer to their whole state or gently processed, they're going to fill us up more. They aren't demonized. Carbs can't be demonized in vegan or vegetarian plant-based eating. You have to take them in. I think a lot of people get confused. They say carbs and they mean bread, pasta, rice, crackers, that kind of bucket of items. But when me and Joey, when we say carbs, we are thinking of all of those foods, plus all of the vegetables, the fruits. So I think there's a little bit of confusion with what a carb is. I know I see it in my clients all the time, and it's a big education point that carbs aren't just cookies, crackers, baked goods, whatever. And those aren't demons. It's all of these carbohydrate foods. So I think that, again, back to the processed, not processed continuum, finding things in the middle or closer to that whole state for carbohydrates is really important. So we're not mindlessly overeating. So we're getting all of those vitamins, nutrients, and fiber and water. I think I'm answering the question. I'm sorry, I forget exactly the.
No, that was right. I just wanted to explore that a bit since keto
Mhm.
is such a hot, popular thing right now. And I think Joey and I also agree. It's really about balance. There's no bad foods, it's just our intention behind why we're eating the way we're eating and trying to kind of have a balanced plate. Like you said, I love how you broke down that plate into like, what a vegan or vegetarian plate might look like with the starchier carbs and then the more watery, fibery carbs, and then that protein, which is a legume or some sort of like tofu type bean, something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And before we move on, just add to this, if we are athletic in some way, if we're exercising, we need carbohydrates. That is the main source of fuel when we're exercising. It's really important that we have those in our body accessible to us and stored in our muscle glycogen. So it's demonizing them would be affecting performance, and something that we don't want to fall into is not recovering well, because what we're wasting our time with our exercise if we're not recovering well and appropriately fueling our bodies.
That is so helpful.
Good call on the carbohydrates. I had a conversation with someone the other day and they were like, "Oh, I can't eat carbohydrates." And I'm like, "Well, there's an apple on your plate, bud. That's a carbohydrate. An apple a day keeps the doctor away." Can we touch on real quick gluten? Because the amber waves of grain that our ancestors grew up on are not the same amber waves of grain today. So why did you what led you to become avoiding gluten?
Back when I eliminated things, it in my research was a top thing that could contribute to the sort of distress that I was experiencing. And it more so than I think the eliminating meat and dairy, I think gluten helped the most. And that's why I've carried it forward now. And it's going on like 15 or 16 years of no gluten. You're right. Grains, wheat from ancient times, even early American colony times, it was different. They were less gluten containing. We are able to genetically modify foods nowadays and have been for a lot longer than a lot of us realize. And, grains have been bred to be more palatable and conducive to manufacturing processes for like bread or other sort of products. And gluten is like a sort of sticky component. It's actually a protein, but it's really sticky. And it gives a sort of crumb or break, like something that the consumers like in the crunch of a cracker or the chew of a bread or cookie. And so it's been bred more into the wheat that we consume. So the wheat we now consume is so much more gluten containing than in the past. And this is likely linked to the increase in incidence of gluten intolerances, or even things more serious like celiac, which I'm not a true celiac. I've had the test, but I still have a severe intolerance. And when I have accidentally eaten it more recently, not fun, very, very awful experience. So it's really interesting how our food has changed due to not only manufacturing, but what the consumer wants. And that we have that weird ability with genetically modifying foods. We're not only doing terrible, like more obvious things to foods, we're actually doing things that make a tomato more plump and bright red and juicy, because that's also something that the consumer wants.
I think it's, sorry, go ahead, Joey.
Have you noticed that again, when you go to the grocery store, the tomatoes on the shelves, the blueberries, the blackberries are like freaking massive. And we garden all the time in the summer, and they're like tiny. And so that they're got to be putting something in the fruits and veggies to make it more cash flow, don't you think?
Yeah, there are different varieties that are specifically to be bigger, juicier, plumper, bluer, redder, whatever the color is. And then what we often buy for seeds for our own gardens are not always more heirloom varieties, but the varieties that these big corporations aren't choosing, right? Because they also breed like pest defense into some of these foods as well, which that's a whole nother story, GMOs and how that affects our health and how it gets into our food. But it's very interesting to think about and to keep in mind when making choices.
Yeah, I think it is really interesting. And And it's good to put things like this on people's radar. And at the same time, I think some people have no issues with gluten. I personally have zero issues with gluten. I eat bread and have never had any issues. So I hate to, like, like we were talking about, you hate to demonize a food group that could be really important for someone if it's very accessible to them and affordable to them.
Mhm.
It is very individualized. And I think that's important to recognize. For you, it's, that's something you really absolutely need to stay away from. And for others, it may not be an issue at all.
Yeah, I wish I didn't have to. I try to see these limitations as an excuse to eat even healthier and be even more aware of what my body needs and how it reacts. So I see it in a way as a blessing, but that's taken many years to develop. It was frustrating for a long time
Yeah.
to see people eating a cinnamon bun and knowing I could try my hardest to recreate it, but it just wouldn't have that same pull and delicious whatever that cinnamon bun can only do.
Yeah, for sure. Joey, do you think we have some time for some overrated, underrated?
Yeah, I do. Celina, this has been great. I got 2 pages worth of notes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, so I'm going to kick us off because I know a lot of other folks out there talk about soy and hormones, overrated or underrated.
I think that that's overrated. I think that the research is not conclusive. And I think that the research that is out there is using extremely high volumes of extremely concentrated soy foods that most people would never actually be daily consuming. So I think that the research is in a way skewed. And it's not conclusive from my experience and what I've read.
Okay, I'm going to throw another one at you. Juicing. You hear about this all the time in the vegan community. What are your thoughts?
So overrated. It's extreme, and anything that's extreme, whether it's like a workout or a diet trend, it's just why do we have to detox? Yes, we get toxins in, but our liver is the detoxifying organ. I just think it's ridiculous, and I personally don't subscribe to it as much as I do love fruits and vegetables.
Okay, I'm going to give you a softball here. You ready? You mentioned this earlier, but I think it's worth drilling home. Vitamin B12 supplementation, overrated or underrated?
There's lots of vegan options that are still junk foods, and they might not contain those actual really important nutrients. So I think it's important for vegans especially to know what the nutrients might be lacking and how to include them, whether through foods, like choosing the right foods, or through supplementation.
That's great. Okay, so what about, and we talked a lot about protein, but this is, I mean, when I was a vegan, probably when you were a vegan, the number one thing you hear is, how do you get your protein? Do people really need to be super worried about a protein deficiency on a plant-based diet?
That's another tough one. For sake of the game, I'm going to say overrated. However, there are some caveats. Older populations, for some reason, I've noticed in my clients, more biological females struggle with getting in more protein. So I think there are some like special populations that really do need to be a little more concerned. But in general, if someone's able to, eat the adequate amount of calories they need to sustain their body in the day to day and their athletic endeavors, I think their protein consumption is going to be fairly adequate.
Okay, I got one more for you.
Mm-hmm.
Organic versus non-organic produce, overrated or underrated?
I think it's overrated. I think if one can afford organic, amazing. It's a really great political choice, but I think that the cost is just really out of reach for some people. And if someone wants to have better health, I don't think that, busting the wallet needs to also come along with that. I think that conventional fruits and vegetables eaten in more volume are going to be outweighing there might be some, more toxins or more environmental distress related to them. And there is some really interesting info on organic farming being less sustainable than conventional. And I know that's super controversial, not able to feed as many people. And I think that it's not needed. If we can choose local foods grown closer to where we live, they're less likely to have some of those commercial products. So if that's an option, but I think organic is if you can afford it. And I'll say one big caveat, processed foods, they're actually more important to choose organic because they're, again, concentrated, highly processed foods. And when we concentrate foods, we concentrate even the toxins. So an organic cereal is likely a better choice for our family than a conventional cereal because it's a very concentrated food. So little things like that can help you navigate the grocery store.
That is so helpful. And I would happen to agree that organic's overrated as well. Celina, you are incredibly well spoken on this topic. I cannot believe the wealth of knowledge that you have. That was so helpful. I think the listener is going to get so much out of this podcast, and hopefully maybe this helps inform their choice about whether they want to be vegan, be vegetarian, or in some way, I love how you say in some way incorporate it, like one meal a day, or like one day of the week doing vegetarian. I think you gave some great options. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun to talk about.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sure you got so much valuable and amazing information from listening to Celina today. Don't forget, check our show notes for a link to sign up for your free trial for Trainwell. You get 14 days totally free to try us out, and you'll get matched with your very own personal trainer.
We love you guys. We'll talk to you next time.